Move your car, right now. Harold barked across my driveway like he owned it. His voice tore through the stillness of the morning, echoing off the quiet row of identical houses. I froze mid-step, coffee steaming in my hand, half convinced I'd misheard him. But when I turned, there he was. Harold Brooks, the HOA president, standing on the sidewalk in his faded golf shirt and smug grin, one hand clutching his phone as he snapped photos of my car. For a second, I didn't even process what was happening. I'd only been living in this neighborhood for 3 months, still learning everyone's names, still trying to blend in. The community brochure had promised peaceful living and shared respect. But that morning, all I saw was Harold's camera flash reflecting off my windshield, and a neon orange notice flapping beneath my wiper. I walked closer, my heart thudding against my ribs. The paper was stamped "Violation Notice, $250 fine." In bold letters, it read, "Unauthorized parking on common property." I stared at the words, then at the driveway beneath my shoes. My driveway, poured with my money, measured and approved before I moved in. "Excuse me?" I said, holding up the paper. "This is my property." Harold didn't even blink. "The association determined that portion is common use area," he said, tone sharp, rehearsed, like he'd been waiting for this. "You were informed in your packet. Rules are rules, Ms. Mitchell." His words hit me like a slap. Rules. My car wasn't blocking anyone, wasn't parked on the street, wasn't doing a thing wrong. "This is ridiculous," I shot back, voice trembling more from shock than anger. "My driveway's on my land." Harold smirked, lowering his phone. "Not according to our records. You can appeal it, after paying the fine." And with that he turned and walked off, muttering something about setting an example for new residents. I stood there speechless. The birds kept chirping, a sprinkler hissed from the neighbor's yard, and I felt this strange weight press down on my chest. The kind that tells you something is very, very wrong. I looked around, half expecting someone to step out and defend me, but the street was empty. Curtains twitched in a few windows. No one came out. By the time I got to work, the whole thing had gnawed into my thoughts. I kept replaying his words, "common use area." That phrase echoed in my head all day, cold and suspicious. When I came home that evening, the orange notice still sat on my windshield, curling slightly at the edges from the sun. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, spreading out every document from my closing packet, the purchase agreement, survey, and property deed. I traced the boundary lines with my finger. Everything was crystal clear. Lot 14B, parcel line extending to the sidewalk. No mention of any shared area, no exception, no fine print. So why was Harold so confident? I opened my laptop and pulled up the county assessor's website. The digital plat map matched my deed perfectly. My driveway, every inch of it, was clearly inside my boundary line. That made no sense. How could the HOA claim otherwise? Unless their map was different. Outside, the wind rattled the mailbox. Something told me to check. I stepped out with a flashlight, the night air thick and cool. My beam swept across the gravel until it caught on something metallic near the mailbox post. A small iron marker, half buried in the dirt. I knelt down, brushing away the soil. The stake was old, weathered, but visible, and it didn't line up with where Harold said the HOA boundary began. My stomach dropped. If this marker was right, and every sign said it was, then the HOA wasn't just wrong. They were standing on my property. And something told me Harold Brooks already knew it. "You're trespassing on HOA property," Harold sneered, his voice dripping with that smug confidence he always wore like cologne. He stood there, arms crossed, a clipboard tucked under his arm as if it were a badge of authority. I couldn't help it. I laughed. The absurdity of it all was too much. "Harold," I said, shaking my head, "this is my driveway." But as his grin widened, something about his certainty unsettled me. He wasn't bluffing. He believed it. That night I decided to prove him wrong once and for all. I pulled out the glossy HOA welcome packet they'd given me when I moved in. Inside, folded neatly behind the community guidelines, was a printed map. thin black lines showing every property in neat little rows. I found my address, Lot 14B. According to their version, the property line stopped just before my driveway began. 6 feet of pavement was shaded gray, labeled common area. That couldn't be right. I grabbed my laptop and went straight to the county's official GIS website. It was late. The glow from the screen cast long shadows across my kitchen table. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed my address into the search bar. When the map loaded, I zoomed in until the streets came into focus, then my lot, outlined in blue, and there it was. My entire driveway was clearly within my boundary. The official survey pin coordinates matched my deed exactly. The HOA map was wrong. Not just wrong, altered. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. I felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief because I wasn't crazy. Dread because someone had gone through the trouble of faking this. The next morning, I printed both maps and sent an email to Harold. My message was polite, maybe too polite for what I felt inside. Dear Mr. Brooks, I reviewed the county assessor's plat map and found discrepancies with the HOA's version. The county's documentation confirms my driveway lies entirely within my private property line. Please clarify which source your enforcement team is using for boundary determination. He replied 3 hours later. No. Greeting. No explanation. Just one short line. Our map is the only map that matters. That's when the anger hit me. Hot, shaking, full-bodied rage. He wasn't mistaken. He was lying. And worse, he thought he could get away with it because I was new, because I wouldn't fight. I called the county office to verify, hoping maybe there'd been an update or a recording error. The clerk confirmed what I already knew. Ma'am, she said gently, HOA maps are not legal boundaries. Only county plats and recorded deeds are recognized. Always trust what's filed at the county. That single call changed everything. I realized this wasn't about a parking fine anymore. It was about control. Harold wanted power, and he'd bend lines, literally, to get it. That evening, I walked back out to the mailbox, flashlight in hand. The stake I'd found before still poked out of the dirt, catching the light. I crouched beside it and started digging, careful not to break anything. The soil was damp and compact, the smell of earth filling the air. My fingers brushed against metal again, another marker, buried deeper this time. I dug it out slowly, heart pounding. The rusted top read Lot 14B, East Boundary Marker. I lined it up with my driveway and the results were undeniable. Harold's common area was a fabrication. As I stood there under the dim streetlight, dirt on my hands, a chill ran through me. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. Harold had drawn new lines, literally, to take what wasn't his. And I had just unearthed the proof he'd been hoping no one would ever find. 3 days later, Harold's voice boomed again. Next fine will be daily if you don't comply. His words cracked through the quiet suburban air like thunder. I stepped outside, clutching my coffee mug, as neighbors' blinds lifted and eyes peeked out from behind lace curtains. Harold stood in the middle of the street, clipboard in hand, pointing at my SUV like it was evidence in a crime. The look on his face wasn't just anger. It was ownership, as if my home somehow belonged to him. I felt my stomach twist, a mix of anger and disbelief rising in my throat. I'd already sent him proof, official proof, that the property line was legitimate. But apparently, facts meant nothing when a man like Harold had a title and a gavel. By that evening, the harassment had turned systematic. 3 new warnings were taped to my front door, each with bold red stamps that read, "Non-compliance notice." My inbox filled with automated emails from the HOA office, each one colder than the last. Failure to respond within 24 hours may result in compounding fines. They didn't even sign the messages with a name anymore. It was all mechanical, bureaucratic, suffocating. The next morning, I caught a glimpse of movement outside my window. A silver sedan rolled slowly down the street, its passenger snapping photos of my driveway. I recognized the logo on the full door. HOA Enforcement Division. I didn't even know such a thing existed. I opened the door and stepped outside, waving my arms. Hey, you can't just take pictures of my property. The car didn't stop. The passenger kept clicking photos until they turned the corner and disappeared. That was the first time I truly felt trapped. Not just angry, trapped. The whole neighborhood felt complicit. People avoided eye contact when I took out the trash. Conversations stopped when I walked by. The same people who'd waved at me when I moved in now pretended not to see me at all. It wasn't just a fine anymore. It was social exile. That night, I sat on my couch, surrounded by copies of letters, maps, and notices spread across my coffee table. My heart ached with the weight of it. I'd worked my whole life for this home. My first house after my divorce, my fresh start. And now some self-appointed tyrant was trying to break me over a driveway. But fear only lasts so long before it turns into defiance. I opened the HOA's community calendar and saw it. Monthly board meeting. Thursday, 6 p.m. I circled it in red. If Harold wanted a fight, I'd give him one. I'd stand up and show every neighbor that this wasn't about a parking violation. It was about truth and power, and someone finally saying enough. In most states, homeowners have the right to attend and speak at HOA meetings. I looked it up just to be sure. Florida, Texas, Arizona. Nearly every state protects that right. They could silence me in an email, but they couldn't stop me from speaking in person. When Thursday came, I walked into the community center with my head high and my evidence folder under my arm. Harold sat at the long wooden table at the front, surrounded by his loyal board members. His eyes locked onto mine, cold and unflinching. I waited patiently for my turn on the agenda, gripping my papers as my pulse raced. When they finally called new business, I stood up. "Mr. Brooks," I began, "you've been issuing fines based on false boundaries." The sound of a gavel cracked through the air. Harold slammed it down so hard the microphone squealed. His face burned red. "You're out of order, Ms. Mitchell," he barked. I tried to continue, but he raised the gavel again, shouting over me. "Remove her from this room!" Gasps filled the hall. In that moment, I realized Harold wasn't protecting the neighborhood. He was protecting himself. "Ma'am, I think your president's lying," said the surveyor as he drove the first metal stake into the soil. The hollow clang echoed down the quiet street, and something inside me shifted. That's when I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a clerical error. It was a setup. The man beside me, Tom Harris, was a local surveyor recommended by a coworker. Mid-40s, calm eyes, a steady presence, the kind of man who measured twice and spoke once. When I'd called him earlier that week, I could hear the skepticism in his voice, the kind that said he'd heard too many stories about HOAs gone wild. But when he showed up, walked the edge of my yard, and reviewed my deed, his face hardened into something closer to disbelief. "Let's settle this once and for all," he said, pulling his steel tape measure from the truck. The morning air smelled faintly of cut grass and damp concrete as Tom began marking points along the driveway. Each metal stake rang out like a warning bell, driving deeper into the ground and into the truth. I watched him cross-check measurements on a digital tablet, the soft beeping of his equipment cutting through the silence. My heart thudded faster with every foot he measured. After nearly an hour, he stood up, wiping his hands. "Your property line is exactly where the county says it is," he announced, tapping one of the markers with his boot. "Your entire driveway, every inch of it, is within your boundary. The HOA's claim doesn't hold." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't rebellious. I was right. That relief lasted exactly 30 seconds, until Harold showed up. His white pickup screeched to a halt beside the curb. He jumped out, face flushed, voice booming before his feet even hit the ground. "What's going on here?" he barked. "You can't just dig holes and drive stakes into HOA property." Tom didn't even look up. "Sir," he said calmly, "this is private property. I'm a licensed surveyor conducting a boundary verification." Harold's jaw tightened. "No, this is common area. I've got maps to prove it." Tom finally turned, leveling him with a patient but firm stare. Then your maps are wrong. The silence that followed was thick and electric. Harold's composure cracked. He took a step forward, waving his clipboard like a weapon. You can't just decide where your line is. I stepped between them. We didn't decide anything. We're proving it. Tom bent down and hammered another stake into place with deliberate precision. The sharp metallic clang made Harold flinch. Licensed surveys are binding in property disputes, Tom said quietly. If you have an issue, take it up with the county recorder's office. Harold's face twisted with rage, but there was nothing he could say that would undo what the stakes had already proven. He spun on his heel and stormed back to his truck, shouting something about illegal activity and reporting this immediately. His tires screeched as he drove away. The neighborhood was silent again. Tom stood, brushing dirt off his jeans. He's bluffing, he said. But this, he gestured to the fresh line of markers gleaming in the sunlight. This will hold up anywhere, even in court. I thanked him, my hands trembling as the adrenaline faded. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Proof. Cold, irrefutable proof. As Tom packed his gear, something caught his attention. An old binder half buried behind my mailbox post. He picked it up and flipped through brittle pages covered in photocopied maps. You might want to see this, he murmured. My stomach dropped when I saw the signature on the bottom corner of each page. Prepared and approved by Harold Brooks, HOA president. The lines on those maps didn't match the counties. They'd been redrawn by him. And suddenly I realized this fight wasn't about a fine anymore. It was about exposing the man who'd rewritten the truth itself. Sit down, Mrs. Mitchell, Harold shouted, red-faced, pounding the gavel so hard the cheap wood table rattled. But this time, I didn't. My hands were steady as I lifted my phone, thumb hovering over the screen. Then, without another word, I hit play, and Harold's own voice echoed through the room. The recording filled the HOA hall with his unmistakable tone. I don't care what the county says. That driveway will stay marked as common area until I say otherwise. A ripple moved through the crowd of homeowners seated in the folding chairs. Some gasped, others turned to whisper. Harold's expression froze for half a second, just long enough for everyone to see it. Then he recovered, leaning forward with forced authority. This, he barked, pointing toward me, is illegal. You can't record me without consent. Yes, I can, I said evenly. Florida is a one-party consent state. You made those statements at a public HOA meeting. Every homeowner here had the right to hear the truth. The room erupted. Neighbors who'd avoided eye contact with me for weeks were suddenly alert, curious, whispering among themselves. Harold slammed the gavel again. Order! Order in this meeting, he barked, his voice cracking under the pressure. But the order was gone. I stepped closer to the board table and set my printed survey results beside my phone. This is the official county boundary survey, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. Conducted by a licensed professional. Every inch of my driveway lies within my property. Harold's map was falsified. Linda, the HOA secretary, shifted nervously in her seat, her pen trembling. One of the board members whispered something to another and leaned away from Harold as if his rage might spill over onto them. Harold's face darkened. You're accusing me of falsifying records? I met his glare. I'm not accusing, Harold. I'm proving it. A man in the back row clapped once. Slow, deliberate. Then another joined in. Within seconds, half the room was murmuring in agreement. Harold's mask cracked completely. You people have no idea what she's doing, he shouted, voice rising an octave. She's trying to destroy this community from the inside. I looked around at my neighbors, people who'd once ignored me, now staring wide-eyed at the man they trusted to run their neighborhood. No, I said softly, I'm trying to protect it. That line must have hit a nerve because Harold snapped. He lunged forward, palms slamming the table, the gavel flying out of his grip and skittering across the floor. Enough! This meeting is over. Not until the board votes to review your map files, I said, refusing to back down. We deserve transparency. But Harold wasn't listening. He turned to the security volunteer by the door and shouted, "Remove her from this room." The room fell silent except for the creak of chairs as people shifted uncomfortably. Even the security volunteer hesitated, glancing at the crowd. No one moved to help Harold. Then a woman's voice rang out from the second row. "Let her speak." Harold froze. What came next felt like chaos in slow motion. Neighbors argued. Voices overlapped. Someone called the sheriff's department after Harold threatened to clear the hall by force. By the time the two officers arrived, the meeting was beyond saving. They didn't arrest anyone. They just told everyone to calm down and disperse. As I gathered my papers, I felt the adrenaline crash into exhaustion. Harold glared at me as I walked past him, his jaw tight, his eyes promising payback. That night, the sound of metal scraping against asphalt jolted me awake. I ran outside, barefoot on the cold pavement, the porch light flickering behind me. My SUV sat there, sagging slightly to one side. 4 clean slashes across all 4 tires. No note, no sound, just the sharp scent of rubber and the hum of a streetlight overhead. And the unmistakable message Harold Brooks had just sent me. "You want proof?" I whispered, tightening the screw on the small motion-activated camera I'd just mounted above the porch light. The plastic clicked into place with a satisfying snap. The night air was cool, thick with that damp suburban silence that hides more than it reveals. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floor, every car passing outside made my pulse race. And then just past 2 a.m., the camera caught him. The motion sensor blinked red as Harold Brooks stepped into frame. He moved slowly, like a man who'd done this before. Flashlight in hand, beam slicing across my lawn. He stopped at my driveway, crouched, and started measuring. The tape stretched across the asphalt, the metallic click echoing faintly in the night air. He paused every few seconds to jot something down. On a clipboard, the camera captured everything. His face, his license plate, the smug precision in every movement. I watched it live from my phone. My stomach knotted. My instincts screamed to fling the door open and shout at him to get off my property. But I didn't. Instead, I recorded. I needed more than anger. I needed evidence. When he finally left, I sat there in the dark, phone clutched in my hands, heart pounding so loud it drowned out the hum of the refrigerator. I had him. Proof that he was trespassing, that he was stalking me under the guise of inspection. The next morning, I walked into the local police station with the footage queued up and ready to play. That's where I met Detective Ray Lopez, a calm, steady-eyed man who looked like he'd seen every kind of neighborhood feud. I explained everything. The false fines, the slashed tires, the doctored maps. He watched the video in silence. When it ended, he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "You did the right thing," he said finally. "Keep documenting everything. The more patterns we see, the stronger your case gets." "So what now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "you stay calm. Let him dig his own grave." It wasn't exactly comforting advice, but it was enough to keep me grounded. That afternoon, I set up 2 more cameras, one near the mailbox, another facing the side yard. I labeled and dated every clip, storing them in a cloud folder. If Harold thought intimidation would break me, he was about to learn that fear only made me sharper. By the 3rd night, the cameras picked up more movement. Harold's truck slowing near my property, headlights flickering off as he parked across the street. He stood there for a while, just staring. I could almost feel the chill of his gaze through the window blinds. When he finally drove off, I realized I wasn't just fighting fines anymore. I was living in a quiet war zone. I researched privacy laws that night, my laptop glowing in the dark. Turns out, homeowners have every legal right to record activity on their own property, as long as they're not violating another person's expectation of privacy. Harold couldn't touch me for having cameras, but I could bury him with what they'd captured. The next morning, I emailed a copy of the footage to Detective Lopez. His reply came fast. "Good work. Keep it up. He's crossing a line." I thought I was finally gaining ground, finally safe enough to breathe. but safety in Harold's world was an illusion. 3 days later, I came home to find a thick envelope shoved through my mail slot. The letterhead read, "Brooks and Jenkins, attorneys at law." My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a formal notice. Harold Brooks, HOA president, was suing me for defamation and harassment. I stood in my kitchen, reading the words over and over. He wasn't just retaliating. He was trying to turn my proof into a weapon against me. And suddenly I understood. The man who couldn't win with lies was now trying to bury me with the law. When I opened the HOA's financial file, I froze. The folder smelled faintly of old paper and printer ink, but what was inside hit me like a gut punch. Invoices, canceled checks, and contracts all funneling landscaping work straight into a company called Brooks and Sons Lawn Care. Harold's company. The numbers didn't just look shady, they looked engineered. Line after line showed payments that doubled in one season. Line items labeled community enhancement and additional common area maintenance that corresponded exactly with the parcels Harold had insisted were common property. Every time Harold redefined a border, the payouts went up. It wasn't power for the neighborhood. It was profit for him. I sat at my kitchen table under the yellow lamp. The papers spread like evidence at a crime scene. My hands trembled, not with fear this time, but with a cold, furious clarity. He'd quietly expanded the HOA's map, redrew lines, shaded in additional pavement, and then hired his own company to maintain the newly created common areas. It was tidy, circuitous theft dressed up as civic duty. The more I looked, the more the pattern emerged. Altered maps, approved by the board minutes that dated back years, and invoices that matched those dates like clockwork. That's when Linda reached out. She didn't call from her official number. Instead, a sticky note appeared on my car windshield one morning. "Meet me by the park bench at noon, alone." My chest did a small, involuntary flip. Linda Cole was the HOA secretary, soft-spoken, always hovering with a pen and more comfortable in the background. She had the kind of face that made you think she'd rather be anywhere else. When I approached the bench, she looked around like someone who'd rehearsed fear and decided to stop pretending. "You didn't come here to chat about flowers," she said without preamble, sliding a thin stack of photocopied minutes across the bench to me. Her voice was low, urgent. "I didn't want anyone to find this in my office. Harold makes us sign things for the record and then hides the real minutes in his desk drawer. People think we voted for these changes, but we didn't. At least not with full information." I flipped through the pages. The minutes were annotated in Harold's handwriting, edits, added language, and approvals stamped with dates that conveniently matched when the common areas increased. Linda's hands shook as she spoke. I didn't know what to do. He threatened to cut me off from the committee if I brought it up. But I can't. Watch him take everything and lie about it. Hearing her speak like that softened something in me. It was betrayal, yes, but also human cowardice. Someone else's fear of crossing Harold. I felt a surge of protection, of righteous anger. For weeks I'd been isolated, targeted, painted as the troublemaker. Here was proof that the problem wasn't me. It was the leadership. We worked through the documents together, cross-referencing invoices with county records and the dates of Harold's revised maps. Each match tightened the noose, where he expanded a common area in a set of internal documents. His company billed the HOA for a new bed of shrubs or a line of pavers. In one case, a community pathway that didn't exist in the county plat suddenly appeared in a Harold-approved map. And within 30 days, a $7,200 invoice from Brooks and Sons showed up and was rubber-stamped by the treasurer. My stomach churned as the scope of it landed on me. This wasn't a petty grudge. This was a network of falsified administrative acts designed to convert community funds into personal income. The betrayal was bitter because it hit the most vulnerable part of being a homeowner. The belief that people who run the neighborhood are custodians, not thieves. Linda pressed her palm to hers and looked me in the eyes. "You have to expose this," she whispered. "I can't do it. I'll lose everything. But you. People listen to you now." Her words were both a plea and a transfer of responsibility. I left the park with photocopies hidden under my jacket and a new resolve, like a hard knot in my gut. I would not let Harold keep rewriting reality for profit. I arranged the copies, labeled each with dates and references, and began planning the path forward. The meeting where I would demand transparency, the evidence I would present, the people I would force to choose a side. That night, when I reached for the front door, a small white square caught my eye taped to the wood. I peeled it off and read the black, perfectly typed letters. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." The paper trembled in my hand as the last of the day's light slipped away. "He threatened you personally?" Attorney Jenna Price asked, leaning forward, her pen pausing above the yellow legal pad. I nodded, sliding the typed note across her desk. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes, sharp, calculating, didn't waver. Then she smiled, slow and deliberate. "Then we make it personal for him too." Her office smelled faintly of leather and espresso. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with casebooks and framed verdicts. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was a fighter. The kind who'd rather be in a courtroom than on vacation. I had found her name through a friend at work, someone who whispered, "She's the one HOAs hate dealing with." I laid out everything I had, the survey reports, the altered maps, the photos of Harold trespassing, even the screenshots of his fines and emails. Jenna didn't interrupt once. She flipped through each page like she was reading a confession. When she finally spoke, her tone was almost clinical. "These maps aren't just wrong," she said. "They're fraudulent. If he filed or used them to impose fines, that's misrepresentation under property law." Hearing someone else say it, out loud, legally, made my skin prickle. For weeks I'd been gaslit into questioning my sanity, but here, sitting across from a woman who lived and breathed real estate law, my story suddenly had weight. "So, what do we do?" I asked. She leaned back in her chair. "First, we hit pause on all enforcement. I'll file an emergency motion to suspend fines pending investigation. Then we counterclaim fraud, harassment, and abuse of authority, and a restraining order, since he's already trespassed." I blinked. A restraining order? Against an HOA president? Jenna's mouth twitched. "If the shoe fits." I let out a shaky laugh. The first one in weeks. But it wasn't joy. It was disbelief at how far things had gone. She slid a document toward me. "Start here," she said. "I'll need your signature so I can act on your behalf." As I signed, she kept talking, voice steady, confident. "Remember this, Sarah. County recorded plats always override HOA bylaws. Their maps are decorative, not authoritative. What's filed at the county is the law." That single sentence felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. It wasn't just about boundaries anymore. It was about principle. We spent hours organizing every shred of evidence into labeled folders. Emails in one, photos in another. Copies of the official plat and survey in a binder so thick it barely closed. Jenna spoke like a general preparing for war. "He thinks intimidation wins," she said. "It doesn't. Documentation does." By the time I left her office, the sun was setting over the city, the glass buildings glowing gold in the light. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I had someone on my side who knew the system and wasn't afraid to use it. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and drafted a summary of the case for Jenna to file the next morning. I even allowed myself a brief, dangerous thought. Maybe this was the turning point. But Harold never fought fair. The next day, while I was at work, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Notifications flooded in, text messages, social media alerts, emails. My stomach turned cold before I even opened one. Someone had posted my full address and phone number online. The message read, "Harold Brooks' harasser lives here. Maybe she should learn to mind her own business." By the time I got home, over 100 comments had appeared. Some were mocking. Some were threatening. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and sat in the dark, the glow of my phone lighting the shaking hands that held it. Harold hadn't just declared war. He'd brought it to my doorstep. Harold strutted into court with a smirk. the same smug, self-satisfied grin I'd seen a dozen times before at HOA meetings. He walked like he owned the place, chin high, one hand tucked into his blazer pocket, the other gripping a thick folder labeled HOA evidence. But by the time we left that courthouse, that smirk was gone, replaced by the pale, hollow look of a man watching his power crumble. The courtroom was colder than I expected, its air heavy with the quiet hum of tension. I sat beside Jenna Price at the plaintiff's table, my palms slick with nervous sweat. Across the aisle, Harold whispered animatedly to his attorney, a slick-haired man who looked like he specialized in bullying letters more than actual trials. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. "This court will now hear Mitchell versus Brooks and the Briarwood Homeowners Association," the clerk announced. Hearing my name echo through the room felt surreal, like my entire life had been reduced to a case number. Jenna rose first, her presence instantly commanding. "Your Honor," she began, "this case is not about a parking dispute. It's about abuse of power and falsified records. My client, Sarah Mitchell, has endured months of harassment, intimidation, and financial coercion, all based on maps that were never approved by the county." Harold shifted in his seat. The judge, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression that gave nothing away, motioned for her to continue. Jenna displayed the first piece of evidence, a large color printout of my official county plat map, the surveyor's seal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "This," she said, "is the lawful boundary of Ms. Mitchell's property." Then she placed the HOA's version beside it. The difference was obvious. Harold's line sliced 6 feet into my driveway. "This," Jenna said, turning toward Harold, "is the map used by the HOA to justify repeated fines and threats of litigation. It was never verified, never recorded, and, as our witness will show, never approved by any licensed authority." She called Linda Cole to the stand. Linda's hand shook slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but her voice was steady. "Yes, I was the HOA secretary. Yes, Mr. Brooks directed me to replace the older maps with new ones. No, we never voted to approve the changes." "Did he tell you why?" Jenna asked. Linda hesitated. "He said it would simplify management zones. But after he redrew the areas, his company started billing the HOA for extra maintenance." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Harold's lawyer stood quickly, objecting. "Irrelevant, Your Honor." But the judge waved him down. "Overruled," he said. "Proceed." Jenna's next move was surgical. She played the audio recording, Harold's voice, angry and clear. "I don't care what the county says. That driveway stays marked as common area until I say otherwise." Harold's face drained of color. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Harold just stared straight ahead, the smirk finally gone. When Jenna rested her case, the judge took a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Brooks," he said slowly, "I have one question. Where did your version of the map originate?" Harold swallowed hard. I redrew it for administrative purposes," he stammered. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Without county approval? Without a licensed surveyor? You do understand that constitutes misrepresentation under state property code." The silence that followed was louder than any gavel strike. The judge finally leaned back and exhaled. "Effective immediately, this court orders the Briarwood HOA to cease all fines, penalties, and enforcement actions against Ms. Mitchell. Furthermore, Mr. Brooks, you will submit all documents for review by county authorities." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until Jenna nudged me gently. "You did it," she whispered. "You won." I looked over at Harold. His jaw was tight, eyes burning with humiliation. The smirk was gone, replaced by something darker, something vengeful. As we gathered our papers, he brushed past me on his way out, his shoulder hitting mine just hard enough to send a message. He leaned in, voice low, venomous. "This isn't over, Mitchell." I watched him walk away, and a cold certainty settled over me. He wasn't threatening a legal fight anymore. He was threatening something personal. At dawn, I found my SUV covered in scratches. Long, deliberate gouges running across the doors and hood. The paint peeled like open wounds under the early light, but what made my stomach drop wasn't the vandalism. It was the empty bracket above my porch. The security camera was gone. Harold wasn't finished yet. I stood there barefoot on the driveway, the cool concrete biting against my feet, the air thick with that faint, metallic scent of damaged paint. My pulse thudded in my ears as I took in the scene. Deep key marks on both sides, my windshield cracked dead center, and the remains of the camera mount dangling by a single screw. Whoever did this had wanted me to know I wasn't safe. The first thing I did was open my laptop. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type my password, but when the cloud backup loaded, my heart leapt. Every clip had synced before the camera was destroyed. I clicked on the final recording. There it was. Harold's white pickup rolled slowly into my driveway at 3:17 a.m. The headlights turned off and the screen glowed faintly as he stepped out, glancing up at the camera before smashing it with something metallic. He walked along the side of my SUV, dragging what looked like a key or a screwdriver across the paint, then stepped back, admired his work, and drove off. I forwarded the footage to Detective Lopez immediately. Within an hour, he called back. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice clipped but calm. "We're filing charges for vandalism and criminal trespass. The evidence is strong. You did good keeping those backups." It wasn't victory, but it was something. Accountability, at least. Still, I couldn't shake the unease crawling up my spine. If Harold had gone this far, what else was he capable of? By the end of that week, the fallout began. The news of his arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood. I watched from my front window as HOA board members trickled out of his house, one by one, each carrying folders and boxes, avoiding eye contact. A special meeting was announced, and by that evening, 3 board members had resigned for personal reasons. Harold's allies were abandoning ship. Then came the local reporters. A silver SUV pulled up outside my home one afternoon, the side emblazoned with a news station logo. The reporter, a young woman with a microphone and too much curiosity, stepped out. "Ms. Mitchell," she called, "is it true your HOA president has been charged with property vandalism?" I hesitated, looking down the street. Neighbors were watching from their porches now, whispering behind coffee mugs. For weeks I'd been the outcast, the woman they pitied. But today, their pity had shifted to Harold. I didn't say much, just enough for the reporter to understand that this wasn't about revenge, but about justice. "I just want to live in peace," I told her quietly. "That's all any homeowner should want." That night, the news aired. The headline was brutal. HOA president under investigation for fraud and harassment. Harold's mugshot flashed on the screen, and for the first time, I felt a sliver of satisfaction. He had spent months trying to humiliate me. Now the entire town knew his name for what it really represented: corruption. But even as I felt the weight lift, another envelope slid under my door the next morning. No return address, no markings, just a single sheet of paper inside. "We can make this go away. $10,000 to settle quietly. No court, no press, no more problems. No signature, no clue who sent it." But the message was clear. Someone still wanted to bury the truth. I folded the letter, staring out the window as the wind rustled the HOA's perfectly trimmed hedges. Harold's empire was falling apart, but the machine behind him was still alive. Desperate, cornered, and more dangerous than ever. I didn't take their money, I took my story to the news. By evening, Harold's face was on every local channel, his name rolling across the ticker like the headline of a scandal no one saw coming. The same man who'd stood on my lawn shouting about rules and community order was now being investigated for fraud, harassment, and misuse of HOA funds. The reporter's voice on the television was calm, professional, but the footage she aired hit like a hammer. She showed side-by-side comparisons of the county's plat maps versus Harold's falsified versions, copies of checks written from the HOA account to Brooks & Sons Lawn Care, and even short clips from my camera footage. Harold sneaking around my driveway in the middle of the night. Neighbors who once turned their backs on me were now glued to their screens, watching the truth unfold. The next morning, I stepped outside and saw a different neighborhood. People nodded instead of whispering. One woman from 2 streets over walked up and said quietly, "We all thought you were exaggerating." "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to respond, so I just said thank you." By noon, things moved fast. County investigators arrived at the HOA office. 2 men in gray suits carrying boxes labeled property record subpoena. They didn't speak much, just taped an under investigation notice on the glass door and went inside. Linda texted me from her car, parked down the block. "They're taking everything, even his computer." That night, the county website posted an official statement. An investigation is underway into allegations of falsified HOA maps, unauthorized expenditures, and misuse of community funds. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from neighbors, friends, and reporters asking for interviews. It felt surreal, seeing years of Harold's dominance evaporate in a matter of hours. The following day, the HOA board held an emergency meeting. This time, it wasn't at the fancy community hall. It was outside, in the park, under the heavy gaze of residents who'd finally had enough. Half the board didn't show up. The other half announced their resignations. Effective immediately, one of them read shakily from a prepared statement. "The current board is dissolved pending reformation and legal review." It was over. For the first time since moving into Briarwood, I felt what peace actually sounded like. Birdsong, distant lawnmowers, no pounding on my door or letters shoved through my mailbox. Just quiet. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset paint the sky in fading orange and violet. My driveway gleamed faintly in the dim light, unmarked, undisturbed. For weeks, that piece of concrete had been the center of a war. Now it was just a driveway again. But it wasn't just about concrete. It was about standing up when you're told to sit down, about finding strength in the truth when lies seem louder. I thought of all the homeowners who'd folded under pressure, the ones who paid fines just to avoid confrontation. I used to be like them, until I realized silence was exactly what people like Harold thrived on. Empowerment doesn't come easy. It's earned, one sleepless night and one document at a time. As I gathered my papers into a neat stack on the kitchen table, I noticed a new envelope mixed in with the mail. Heavy, official-looking, with the county prosecutor's seal stamped in blue across the top. My breath caught as I read the label on the front. State of Florida vs. Harold Brooks. Inside was a notice confirming what I'd been hoping for. Formal criminal charges were being filed. The fight was ending, but the reckoning was just beginning. "Mr. Brooks has been charged with fraud," the letter read. I laughed, not out of joy, but out of pure relief. The kind of laugh that breaks through after months of holding your breath. I sank into my kitchen chair, the crisp official paper trembling in my hands. For the first time in nearly half a year, it felt like the world had tilted back into balance. The county prosecutor's seal glimmered faintly under the morning light. The letter detailed everything. Harold Brooks indicted on multiple counts of fraud, falsification of property records, and abuse of authority as an HOA officer. There it was, in writing, stamped and signed. The man who had harassed me, fined me, trespassed on my property, and tried to ruin my life was finally being held accountable. Outside, the neighborhood was strangely calm. The same street where Harold used to strut like a self-appointed sheriff now felt lighter, freer, like everyone could finally breathe. His house sat dark, blinds drawn, the once pristine lawn overgrown. No one had seen him since the charges went public. I folded the letter neatly and set it on the counter before stepping outside. The sun was just rising, painting the sky a soft gold as I walked down the driveway. My driveway, the one they'd tried to claim, threaten, and fine me over. The smooth concrete felt like victory under my feet. Every line, every inch of it was mine, reaffirmed in the county records, legally untouchable. Detective Lopez pulled up a few minutes later, his unmarked sedan rolling to a stop at the curb. He stepped out, hands in his pockets, his expression a mix of pride and calm satisfaction. "I heard you got the letter," he said with a small grin. "I did," I replied, holding it up like a badge. "It's finally over." He nodded slowly. "You did good, Sarah. Most people fold when HOAs push this hard. You didn't. You made noise, documented everything, and fought back. That's why it stuck." His words hit deeper than I expected. I'd been so focused on surviving each day, each fine, each confrontation, each threat, that I hadn't realized how far I'd come. "I didn't do it to make a point," I said quietly. "I just wanted to be left alone." "Yeah," Lopez said, glancing down the street. "But sometimes standing up for yourself ends up standing up for everyone else too." After he left, I lingered outside for a while, breathing in the morning air. The neighborhood birds chirped like they were announcing a new season. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. A sound I hadn't heard in weeks. The fear that once clung to every corner of my property was gone, replaced by a steady calm that felt hard-earned. Later that evening, I sat in front of my camera, the one Harold had tried to destroy, and recorded the final part of my story for the viewers who'd followed along since the beginning. "Would you fight your HOA like I did?" I asked. "Tell your story below. Because if there's one thing this nightmare taught me, it's that intimidation only wins if you stay silent." I leaned closer to the lens, voice soft but sure. Persistence defeats intimidation. Always. And if you're watching this, and you're fighting your own HOA battle, don't give up. The law is on your side if you're willing to dig deep enough to find it. Then with a small smile, I ended the video with my usual sign-off. Subscribe. Next case involves an HOA that destroyed a veteran's home. And trust me, you'll want to see how that one ends. As the camera light blinked off, I looked out through the window one last time. My driveway stretched ahead, untouched, solid, and finally, undeniably, mine. But even as I closed the laptop, a thought lingered, the seed of another story waiting to grow. "Next episode," I whispered, "when a simple fence sparks a neighborhood war worth $60,000.